Hi, everyone. Welcome to our panel today, To a Century and Beyond. Thank you, Home Instead, for bringing this incredible group of global experts together. I am Melissa Gong Mitchell, Executive Director of the Global Coalition on Aging. And I love this topic so much, not least because of the fun Buzz Lightyear reference. But this topic, our longevity, the aging of society, it gets a bad rep too often. And our experts today are going to shine a light on the opportunities that come with aging, especially if you're an innovator, like so many of you in the audience. So think about this. Over the 20th century, we've achieved a 30-year gain in life expectancy. 9 out of 10 girls born in Europe today will live into the next century. A 13-year-old today has a 50% chance of living to 104. And undoubtedly, we've hit some blips on the radar due to COVID-19 and crises like the opioid epidemic in the US. But overall, these longevity trends will continue. The expectation to live past a century will be the norm. And it'll be led by blue zones, places like the blue zones, where there are very low rates of chronic disease. Some demographers even speculate that the first person to live to be 150 is alive today. Alongside this longevity, we've seen declines in birth rates, leading to a time where we now have more people on the planet over 65 than under 5. But with this context in mind, here's what I'm hoping we'll focus on today: healthy aging. And healthy aging isn't just for older people. Healthy aging is for all people. And it's not just something that happens. We have to promote, nurture, and enable our healthier, longer lives. Health and financial systems rightly see potential for concern, but that's only if you have a narrow frame of thinking. So our panel is going to share some ways in which societies and individuals must adapt and become bolder as they become older, more innovative and less stigmatizing when approaching aging. From my point of view, representing the business voice at GCOA, I work with companies to identify this vast opportunity, not only because we can do so much good for society by reframing aging, but also because there's this incredible business opportunity that's still very much untapped. An indicator of progress is this. Even amidst COVID-19, the World Health Organization and United Nations have declared 2020 to 2030 the decade of healthy aging. The central pillar is a new way of thinking about health, and it's not measured purely by the absence of disease, but by functional ability. And this is a person's capability to be and do what it is that they value: decision-making, mobility, relationships, contributions to society. So with all this in mind, I'm so pleased to introduce our 3 panelists: Dr. John Beard, the former head of Aging and Life Course at the WHO, who created the whole concept of the Decade of Healthy Aging; Dr. Samir Sinha, Director of Geriatrics at Sinai Health out of Toronto; and David Sinclair, Director at the International Longevity Center in the UK. So to turn it over to our panelists, we are all here because we believe that our longevity can provide incredible opportunities. So in about 2 minutes each, I'd like for each of you, starting with John, and then we'll go to Dr. Sinha, and then we'll go to David. Tell us a bit about you and why you think others should be as optimistic as we all are about longevity. John?
Okay, thanks, Melissa. I think you've covered it well. So I work with academia, the private sector, and governments to try and rethink the second half of life. The reason I'm optimistic about that is that when we started living longer, and you summarize it wonderfully, what happened was we were stuck in a very outdated and rigid way of thinking. We used to think we'd study till we were 25, work till we were 65, and then retire. And then we kept living longer and longer, and we added those extra years to the end of life. But I think over the last decade or so, people have really started to rethink that rigid framing and think of life more as a continuum. When you do that, it creates all sorts of extra opportunities for the individual and all sorts of different roles for society. So I'm very optimistic.
Okay, Dr. Sinha.
Yeah, so just what John was saying is that we actually have a longevity dividend that, that we're now kind of figuring out what do we do? Because, way back when you hit that age of 65, people's life expectancy was only maybe a few more years to go. But now, if you're lucky to make it to 65 in our society, and most of us will, that's the great news, we have about 20 years of life expectancy ahead of us just right now. And most of that's going to be in relatively good health. So all of a sudden, people are realizing that, hey, I'm healthy, I'm older, I want to stay in the workforce. I want to be an active volunteer and community member. There are many things that I want to do. And this whole notion of dependency and the fact that older people can't contribute beyond the age of 65 is being completely thrown out of the window, because we realize these are consumers. These are individuals who are actively providing most of the unpaid childcare and elder care in our societies. Many of them are still staying in the workforce. And as we think about our evolving economies, I think those who are going to get this right are going to think about how do we help continue to engage older adults to stay independent, productive, and engaged citizens.
Thanks, Dr. Sinha. I think my perception of that is let's retire retirement. We all want to work and continue to give back to society, maybe in different ways. John, you're a great example of that. So thanks for that introduction. David, give us your perspective.
And just to absolutely agree, I think there's a massive longevity dividend we all need to benefit from. So when I'm at my most negative, I sometimes think nothing's changed. But actually, even in places like the UK, in big bits of the world, over the last 20 years, we've seen a change just in terms of, for example, it's no longer pretty inevitable that you're going to be poor in old age. It used to be the case that as we got older, we were almost inevitably poorer. So we've seen significant changes. And I think the economic and social contributions of older people will transform the world for all of us. In 2015, for example, households across the G20 spent, older households across the G20 spent $9.7 trillion US dollars. That's the equivalent of the GDP of Japan, Australia, Canada, and Brazil combined. There is huge, huge economic spending by over 50s in the wealthier countries. And similarly, John talked about carers, unpaid contributions of those aged over 50 across the EU is worth more than these countries spend on defence. So we're looking at huge economic and social contributions. And what our research shows at ILC is that investing in health and care results in more spending, more care, and working longer. And I think governments and businesses will grasp this opportunity.
Melissa, can I just interrupt? Because David, I think a lot of the research you've done is fantastic in that it actually advances the discourse around this topic. When I was at WHO, we pulled together some of the world's top economists, and economists tend to continually frame aging as a negative. They see, as Samir said earlier, that older people are dependent and a drain economically on society. But I think some of the research that you've done shows that they actually contribute far more than they take. And I think we really need to shake up this thinking to move away from those outdated models.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And I think that's a great way to dig in to figure out where is innovation actually happening. I think that's what folks want to hear about. We know there are going to be roles for societal institutions and there are roles for individuals to really break this stigma, but also to take action. So reframing these outdated perceptions is really important, but also looking at what transformative innovation really is and how it takes place. So we're seeing this reflected in everything from digital health to home care, from retirement and work and financial planning to transportation and housing, just rethinking everything, but then also taking some action. So to get our juices continued to flow here, I think our audience wants to know, what innovations are you seeing out there in this space that are enabling older people, that are enabling healthy aging, and that excites you?
Yeah, shall I just come in? So I think if you look at dramatic change over the last couple of decades, 150 years ago, we had our first phone. Yeah, it took 150 years for half of the world's population to have a phone. It only took 4 years for 50 million people to have internet access compared to 75 years for 50 million people to have a phone. So we've seen this dramatic change over a short period. I have to say, I'm not excited by a single innovation. What I'm really excited by is this step change that we've seen over the last 20 years. And to give you a couple of examples, in the last couple of years, Gillette produced a razor blade, which is easy for carers to use. We see Lego recognizing that adults like to play and creating thoughtful products and services around play for all ages. Really excited that what we're going to see over the next few years is a tripling of the investment in online learning. What this this means is there's massive opportunities for lifelong learning. Apps, there are already apps there that help people in the gig economy learn while they're waiting for the pizza to be picked up. Actually, can we not learn from that in terms of supporting carers and supporting all of us as we're outside the shop to pick up information? So I think that it's not a single thing for me. It's that actually the trends we're going to see are going to, gradually transform our lives.
Well, I just want to build on that, because just what David was saying is that we have to throw out all these notions that we might have traditionally had about older people. People say that, oh, older people can't use technology, but they're actually the fastest growing users of social media in our society. And right now we're trying to think about how do we actually improve access to technology and make it easier for people to use? Because again, when you engage this really active, growing segment of our society, they can participate more as a participant, but also as a spender as well.
I think so. Just to add to that, I think you're absolutely right. This is about addressing stereotypes. If I was over in Austin, sadly I'm not at the moment, but if I was over in Austin today, I'd be heading over to that Continental Club across the road from the motel and spending my evening there. We know older consumers have massive interest in the nighttime economy, and yet actually, so there's huge potential for innovation in, for example, the nighttime economy, in theatres, in gigs, in supporting people to engage with their communities. And I think that actually, if we need to address the sort of chronic ageism that assumes that people aren't interested, which therefore means that you don't see the innovation we need.
David, I was going to pick up on that myself, because I think there are a lot of innovative things happening out there, but there's also a lot of missed opportunities. And the biggest barrier is this stereotype that there's such a thing as a typical older person. And everybody over the age of 65 is lumped in the same box, and the private sector assumes that they all want the same thing, but we're all individuals. And as we age, in fact, that individualness, all our individual characteristics becomes more and more diverse, and all the things that have happened across our lives build up and become manifest in the later years of life. And I think it's really important that people move away from this stereotype of an older person to understanding that we're all individuals, and trying to tailor the products which they offer so that they actually meet that very diverse range. One of the things I find really exciting at the moment, and it's only just starting, but I think it's going to be absolutely transformative, is in the field of healthcare, where we're seeing more and more personalized medicine. In the past, treatments were basically, you had diabetes, you got this treatment. You have this, you get that. Now people are actually looking at the individual they're dealing with and seeing and trying to tailor the interventions that they offer them according to a whole range of different characteristics of that individual. And I think there's going to be more and more of that. And I think, as you say, we need to be realizing that there are some people in their 80s who want to go out partying at night. There are some of us younger than that who want to be in a cave for a while and meditate and want to have a retreat. But, we're a very diverse population, and that diversity becomes more and more manifest as we age.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point I'd love to build on, because we have this fundamental misunderstanding that this is a very complicated and diverse sector. It's very heterogeneous. And I think it's important to emphasize that intergenerational collaborations are important for breaking down these stereotypes. I firmly believe this is an issue for younger generations as much as older generations, if not more, because we're preparing the future for ourselves if we are younger or if we have children. And so I think we can talk about sort of the value of older people in the workplace and society, and how we need to combat this ageism. It's across healthcare, right? Because in healthcare, many times a doctor might assume, or healthcare professionals or caregivers might assume, that something is a symptom of just getting older, when really it could be an early sign of a heart condition, or it could be an early sign of a risk of falls or osteoporosis or vision loss is going. These aren't normal parts of aging. These are things that are preventable, and they're things that we can take action on. But when I think about bringing in a younger generation to this conversation, so purpose is a huge part of what we're seeing with younger generations. And that's happening with older generations as well, of course. And so 2/3 of millennials say that they chose to work in an organization because it has a strong purpose that they relate to. But for aging, we haven't gotten to the point where this rises to the level of something that feels like it has purpose, or to get to a point of a social movement. And we've actually rarely seen aging and older adults as part of diversity inclusion strategies. And to me, that should be very obvious. So short of becoming a social movement, like, how do we continue to have these conversations? How do we build in this intergenerational piece and help break down those stereotypes?
I think we've got to listen to innovators, and actually, I think we are actually, as you say, making progress. And to give you some examples, I think what we've got to do is stop making aging dull. Aging is really exciting. There's so many interesting opportunities. So, give you two examples of the diversity of the opportunities here. So, in Japan, there is now a new genre of manga comic where older people aren't sort of pitiable older people, but are protagonists making discoveries, finding friends, sometimes having hot sex, all sorts. It's a completely different model. At the same time, the fastest growing household product business across the US, the North America, is adult diapers. So what you've got is this really interesting world where we need to be building on the fact that we are extraordinarily diverse. There is a massive, massive market, and actually using that to support this idea of a social movement, but also not denying we age, because actually we need products and services to support us as we age, and far too often we sort of pretend it's not happening to us.
I think one of the things that we really forget is that, in Canada, when we developed our universal healthcare system just over 50 years ago, the average Canadian was 27 years of age. And most Canadians didn't live beyond their 60s. And so all of a sudden, we created an entire healthcare system that was designed for the needs of a much younger population. And in fact, in Canada, the majority of our medical schools do not teach geriatric medicine. We all teach pediatric medicine, but not geriatric medicine. And so when you actually then empower an entire new generation of medical graduates, doctors, and nurses and social workers without that lens of, well, let's help you understand that diverse older population that you will be caring for, it creates a missed opportunity. So when we think about equity, diversity, and inclusion, I think we get it, that we probably shouldn't be racist, we probably shouldn't be sexist, but I think that we don't actually think about ageism, and how ageism is one of those things where we often end up ignoring the needs of certain populations when we're not even aware of that. So it really starts about making sure that for people who are really interested in actually, for example, running a successful business or doing that, it's get to know your customers and get to know the people you might be caring for as a physician. And so by making sure that we train people to understand that, I think John said it earlier, is that you meet one older person. Understanding that diversity then allows you to see the opportunities, because I have all these tech people who come to me and say, Dr. Sinha, I've invented this really great product for older people in their 90s, and it's great. And they just press all these buttons, they do this and that. And I said, well, what about the fact that, almost half the people in their 90s are living with a cognitive impairment, right? Mm-hmm. Does this work for them? Or can this product evolve, if their cognition evolves as well, so it can even be more inclusive? Because otherwise you're losing 50% of your market. And then, people just like, they've been working on something for 2 years, and then they kind of leave my office with their tail between their legs going, how the hell did I miss that? So I think it's that idea that when you start understanding and using that opportunity to learn about the diversity of this population and what those opportunities really entail, that's going to be the marker of a real successful entrepreneur or a healthcare provider or a teacher or whatever we want to be in society.
Yeah, go on, John.
Yeah, no, Melissa, you touched on the issue of purpose, and it's one I'd like us to sort of explore a little bit. I think it's easy when we talk about aging to either be too positive or too negative. And I think it's much more nuanced than that. And one of the things which tends to be left out of the debate is purpose in older age, and the search for meaning. This isn't something that's just limited to people in their 40s. People across their lives are searching for meaning and purpose. And, personally, I hope that I'm still growing when I take my last breath. and trying to rethink the later stages of life in a purposeful way, I think is really challenging and something that often is left out of the debate.
And I was just going to sort of pick up on the point around sort of, I also get lots of people coming to me with ideas, and you think, oh my goodness me, you haven't even Googled that. And that's a really, really terrible idea. So to give you a really good example, I've got this really good idea of a Facebook for older people. And I'm like, seriously, why would you only want to talk to other older people? I think there's often, and I think I would share the view that, the really successful innovators will get out there, talk to people of all ages, including old people, and really understand sort of what it is they want and need, and not fall into the trap of the sort of assumptions that you are this age and therefore frail.
Well, and I think one of the things we think about is like a lot of the folks, for example, in Silicon Valley or that are, in their 20s, and yet they're thinking about technologies for people in their 70s or 80s. Mm-hmm. So there's this common phrase that we hear, nothing about us without us, right? And so the key is, back to your point, Melissa, about intergenerational partnerships. This is one of those great examples where, David and I would be, and I'm sure John would be less disappointed when people come to us with a great idea if they just did a little bit of homework saying, you know what, I'm going to actually go out and interview a few different 90-year-olds and kind of learn about what's important to them, because you'll be amazed, and you'll be amazed about the assumptions that we have that really need to be challenged, and the wisdom they can get to you, because frankly, they're going to tell you what's going to appeal to them. And frankly, if you design something that appeals to them, you're going to have a success on your hands immediately.
And I think that's a great segue into a question I wanted to ask about. How do we get to this investment, right? We're elevating the conversation. We're seeing it change. We're seeing some interesting trends. We're seeing some innovations pop up. But what's the political environment we need to make real change? Where are we going to see financial investments coming from? I'm hoping it's from people who are listening to this session today. But what do we need to make sure that this innovation continues?
Well, I think initially there is a global mandate for action, which you mentioned earlier, Melissa, which is the Decade of Healthy Aging, which runs for the next 10 years. So that's a UN global decade, which hopefully people can then hold their governments accountable to. They can say, what are you doing in terms of the decade? You're meant to be contributing to this and changing the way the policies that you make. But I think a lot of it will also come down to some of the economic arguments, which also we touched on earlier. I think they're very outdated. I think older people are portrayed as a drain on society, and we need to much better quantify the contributions they make. And economists are very influential in terms of policy makers. So I think we need to somehow get to them and change their mindsets and get them to start thinking about some of the things we've been talking about.
And I think that's exactly it. I think when we actually show that this is actually just not an area that we have to spend money and we're going to lose money by caring for an older population, but actually making the right investments that actually help people stay healthy and independent actually saves your healthcare system money. Actually doing things right from, when people are born will actually ensure that they can actually achieve more of that longevity dividend, and actually doing things when people are older to help them stay healthy and independent in their homes will help them live longer, happier, and healthier lives. But it's that notion that we have this outdated term, as John was referring to, called the dependency ratio, where we basically say that once you reach the age of 65, you're a complete drain on the rest of the economy, not recalling the fact that older people don't stop paying taxes, for example. Older people don't stop, spending money on food and other things. And older people are the largest volunteer workforce that we have. They're the largest providers of unpaid childcare and the largest providers of elder care, if you will. So when you actually think about all of the things that older people can do, we start realizing that we probably are not valuing those contributions. And frankly, there's often an opportunity to maximize those contributions that we can do. And so I think John was absolutely right. As we actually start reframing this from an economic opportunity and just frankly a societal opportunity, we realize this is a really positive story and one that we want to get ahead of rather than fall behind.
Yeah, I think this is really a great conversation to be having. And I think what we've learned, we're going to have to close in just a minute, but we got to change these perceptions. And that starts here. It starts with this conversation. And we have to recognize that there's a real sound investment when we're looking at not only the older population, but healthy aging as a process. Because in my mind, you get a consumer when they're young, or you get a consumer when they're 30 years old or they're 40 years old. You've got a lot more years to have that to get that stickiness and to have them sticking along with you. So I think there's a huge investment opportunity for folks who want to innovate in this space. So in closing, I'm going to let you guys think on this, and I'll start with David. We'll go to Dr. Sinha, and then we'll close out with John. What's the one thing that you would challenge our audience to do to lead change for healthy aging and recognize these opportunities of our 100-year lives? If they could go out tomorrow in their business or in their personal life, what's the one thing they should do? David.
I'm going to cheat and give you two. I think, firstly, we need to not see climate change and new technology as being separate for innovation. These three big global challenges have to sit together, and any innovators in this space have to be thinking about all three together. But then as a message for all of us as individuals, I think we've got to stop pretending we aren't like our mum and dad. Too often I get people saying, look, that won't happen to me. I won't go to a care home. I won't get frail. The reality is that, I've just had to have glasses. Our eyesight's likely to get worse. Our hearing's likely to get worse. If we pretend this isn't going to happen to us, we won't prepare and we won't be ready for old age. So we've got to stop, sadly, we have got to prepare for old age.
Yeah, and I just building on what David was saying, I think for a lot of the entrepreneurs out there who are thinking about, I could see that my product or my innovation really could, I want to look at older people as a potential market, then I would challenge all of you to think about hiring a CEO, and not a chief executive officer, but a chief elder officer. Make sure that you engage, the potential customers you're thinking about, because you'll be incredibly surprised when you actually start talking to them and realizing the insight and value you can get to get your products and your innovations right off the bat.
And for me, I think also that it starts with each of us as individuals. Most of us want to live a long and healthy life, and also a fulfilling life. And we need to start thinking of that at whatever stage we're at right now. If there are people out there who are 30, you should be thinking about this, because your lives are going to be very long, and now's the time to start building putting in place the building blocks which will ensure it's fulfilling. And if we each do that as individuals, I think the other thing we need to do is accept the terrible consequences of the pervasive ageism that is out there, the pervasive attitudes which really stereotype people and push them into boxes which they don't want to be in. And there's good evidence that has very negative impacts on each of us as individuals, and is as pervasive as racism and sexism, and we need to start calling it for what it is.
Well, thank you. This is such an insightful conversation. I take away from it that there is opportunity. There's societal opportunity, there's economic opportunity, and there's just a lot of opportunity for learning and for sharing and for bringing us all together. So this has been incredibly insightful. Thank you so much to our experts who are joining us from all around the world today. Thanks to Home Instead, especially Gisela Dolan and Emily Allen. Thanks to Energizing Health and South by Southwest. And thank you to our audience. And I hope each of you will join us on this exciting journey to a century and beyond.